Hey there, and welcome back to Common Knowledge, the show where I take a look at common Magic the Gathering cards and tell you are they any good in the Pauper format or not. Let's get started right away. What do you say? We'll start with Riot Ringleader, 2 and a red for a 2/2 human warrior. And when this creature attacks, human creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. This seems familiar. I feel like we might have done this a long time ago. Even if we have, I suppose we can just do it again. This seems all right, a bit of a grizzly bear here, a 2/2 creature. I just call all 2/2 creatures grizzly bears, even though I guess it really should be a 2-mana 2/2 as a grizzly bear. Anyway, this having an attack trigger, giving all human creatures you control, so it really is like a 3/2 in most cases. Well, I guess not most cases, half the cases. But this having an attack trigger that affects itself as well, in addition to all of your other potential human creatures, that's all right. We've seen a couple of cards that would be potentially useful with this. There's even a whole archetype in Pauper, Red Rally, which is built around this card from Lord of the Rings, where you make two 1/1 white human soldiers, and then humans you control get haste. So it's also red. It also makes humans. It also works with humans. I could see that being not terrible in that deck. There are just better options, though, and you end up playing those better options instead of this. But this is kind of a nice battle cry style effect just for humans. And I think you could make that work. You probably want to go Boros if you're going to do that. There are humans in red, but there aren't. White is really where you get all those good humans, especially in the Pauper format. You get your Thraben Inspector, Novice Inspector, Rafine's Informant, plenty of guys that just make a whole lot of sense for that. I bet you could make a Boros humans deck, and it would be decently powerful and aggressive in Pauper. But I think you could also probably just make an even more aggressive and better White Weenie deck, or even more aggressive and better Red Rally deck, or Boros Synthesizer, Boros. There's plenty of other Boros style decks that you can do as well that I think you'll probably end up having a better time, a more consistent time than you will if you just tried to play with either just red humans or you try to make a Boros humans deck. That being said, I still like it. I'm going to give this thing a 3. I'm going to give it a 3.8. I'd like to give it higher, I guess, but it is a creature that's relatively vanilla. Yeah, it gives itself and other human creatures the +1 power when it attacks, but it doesn't have first strike. It doesn't have, I don't know, trample. It doesn't have anything else that would give it some sort of evasion or some sort of survivability in that way. And so it's very easy for an opponent to block and probably kill this or trade with this. And then, maybe they take a little bit of damage on from your other creatures that are attacking. But yeah, I think this could be a little bit better, especially if you're paying 3 mana for it. What's our next card? It is Melstrider's, Meltstrider's Gear. For a single green mana, you get an artifact equipment that says when this equipment enters, you attach it to target creature you control. We generally like that for our equipments. You get a free equip. That's pretty nice. Equip creature gets +2/+1 and has reach. Okay. And it equips for 5. Now, equipping for 5 is obviously pretty bad. That's a lot of mana. So you are probably only really getting the one free equip when you start, and maybe you don't have another way of doing that. Although, is there any sort of Selesnya bounce deck that you can do with Glinthawks or Core Skyfishers and then bounce this back to your hand to be able to play again? I think red just probably does that a little bit better. I have a Boros equipment deck that is all about those flash equipments, your Inventor's Axe or your Mirren Bane Splitter. And those are nice to bounce back to your hand and then play again at flash speed because they also freely attach. I don't think you have the wealth of equipments in red and white that you would in green and white. So I don't know about this. What I do think that's important to note is that this is, you could treat this kind of like an aura if you wanted to. because it is mostly just like a 1 mana. It's like an unholy strength because it gives the +2/+1, but it also gives you reach. Like that's pretty good stats and a pretty good ability for a single mana. And sure, it only gets the one equip for free, but that's kind of just what an aura does, right? And this thing would even stay on the board where the aura would go to the graveyard. This does up your artifact count if you're caring about some sort of affinity style deck. Those decks generally are not green, but I don't know. That's a pretty decent stat buff. Now, it is a little bit of a weird stat buff, getting more power and reach. Reach is a defensive ability, but this is giving you more offensive power. Not 100% sure about that, but it does turn a creature into a pretty big threat, no matter how big or small it was to begin with, for only a single mana. And I don't mind that. I think this is all right. I'm going to give this a 3.3, I believe. I'm a little bit impressed. I don't even remember that card. I was playing in Edge of Eternities. Silent Dart is a single mana for an artifact. You can pay 4 and tap it to sacrifice this artifact, and it deals 3 damage to target creature. I think we did something very similar to this, but there are a lot of cards that are very similar to this. And I think this is one of the worst ones. We see things like Universal Solvent, or I can't remember the other one, but there's another one that I think you pay 7 and you sacrifice it and you can destroy a permanent or maybe even exile a permanent. And Silent Dart only works on creatures. Yeah, it's less to pay to activate the ability, but I think if you're looking for cheap artifacts to play on turn 1, there's a lot of 0 mana artifacts that you can play that are in the Pauper format if you're just looking to get your artifact count up for, a Mirror Retriever or something with affinity for artifacts. I don't think this is particularly good, and I've mentioned this a number of times, but 5 damage is really the one that you want to hit. Like that hits some of the biggest, scariest creatures that you're potentially going to encounter. So this only dealing 3 misses out on a significant chunk of the scary creatures that you'd want to hit with something like this. Also, it's kind of just 4 mana. It's kind of 5 mana. 5 mana for a lightning bolt's worth of damage. And that damage can only hit creatures? Come on. I know it's colorless and any deck can play it, but come on. This is bad. This is really bad. I'm going to give this a 1.9. I don't feel like rewarding this thing with a 2. I think it's bad enough that it gets into 1 territory. Tassiger's Cruelty is 5 and a black for a sorcery with Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana. And its text says, each opponent discards 2 cards. So, in some cases, this can be a 1 mana Mind Rot. And that's kind of cool. In Commander, it can be even better than a 1 mana Mind Rot because it hits all your opponents, not just one. We see Delve do really good work in and out of Pauper. In Pauper, I was just talking about 5 power and toughness creatures. You see Gurmag Angler. That's a big one that gets played in black and Dimir decks, mostly because they are really good about filling up their graveyards and then being able to use a Gurmag Angler to put down a nice big 5/5 and delve all those cards away from your graveyard that you don't need. We've also seen things like, is it Hooting Mandrills or Howling Mandrills? It's a 4/4 green ape monkey guy, and that's also pretty good. That comes with trample, so you have a nice green version of a Gurmag Angler in most ways. Yeah, it's not the stats aren't as good. It's 4/4 instead of a 5/5, but still, that's all right. We've also seen a bunch of Lorehold cards now from the new Strixhaven set, and those want to have you exile cards from your graveyard to get other effects, and Delve works really well with that. So there are things that you could do. I just don't see a whole lot of Mind Rots being played these days. We have better ways of making opponents discard cards in Pauper, whether it's, the cream of the crop like Refurbished Familiar, or you see Wrench Mind get played a little bit. That's double black to force an opponent to discard 2 cards or an artifact card. And if your opponent is not playing artifacts, that is a really good way to get them. That's a great rate to make them discard 2 cards. We see Hopeless Nightmare in some bouncy decks that can be used relatively nicely. You see plenty of creatures that will come down, like Virus Beetle can come down and force an opponent to discard a card. I think we have enough good discard cards that this one doesn't rate among those other ones, even though it could be a single mana. Maybe if you have some real ways of throwing everything into your graveyard and you don't need 5 of those cards. That's my other problem with Delve. Like it forces you to exile those cards out of the graveyard. So even if you're using graveyard strategies, you're kind of taking away from the possibilities. That's one of the things I don't really like about Dimir Terror, is that a lot of Dimir Terror decks will also run some Gurmag Anglers in addition to their Tolarian Terrors and their Cryptic Serpents. And when you do that, you end up often taking out some of the cards, delving away some of the cards in your graveyard that you would need to play your Tolarian Terrors. And I just think that kind of goes against not the spirit exactly, but it goes against your main strategy. And it is a useful backup strategy for sure. It gives you more cards that are big 5/5s. I get that. But it can be a little counterintuitive. And I'd rather my decks not be counterintuitive at all, even if they could potentially be very strong. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think Tassiger's Cruelty is a fine card, an okay card, an interesting card with the delve there. I don't really think it sees much play, nor will it see much play going forward. Let's go ahead and give this thing I'm still going to give it a 2.5. 1 mana discard 2 is pretty good. But you also have to note that because there are a lot of graveyard strategies in Pauper these days, forcing an opponent to discard a couple cards isn't the boon that it once was. Sometimes you can be actually feeding into your opponent's strategy, and that can feel real bad when you play a discard spell and they drop a big creature that they're just going to use excavate no I forgot what, exhume. They're just going to play exhume the next turn, and you basically helped them out, and that can feel bad too. Or they have like madness cards and they can hurt you that way as well. But yeah, I think that score makes a lot of sense for it. Let's keep that 2.5-ish and then move on to Taste of Paradise. 3 and a green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may pay 1 and a green any number of times. You gain 3 life plus an additional 3 life for each additional 1 and a green you paid. I think this is one of those cases where I understand the templating. That's how normal Magic syntax works these days, but it was a lot easier to say on the old card. You look at that Alliance version. Yeah, you gain 3 life. You pay 4 mana, you gain 3 life. And then if you want to pay more mana, you can gain more life after that. It's a little cleaner, honestly, even if this is proper, I suppose. I guess this is the better art, although that art's not too bad either. This is bad. 4 mana for 3 life is terrible. It's sorcery speed to boot. So that is pretty bad. And then you could even pay more mana on top of that if you wanted to. And this is an additional cost to cast this. So you're paying even more mana to begin with. And if your opponent counters this spell, all of it gets countered. So you don't get any of the extra life there. Sometimes when there's an additional cost to cast a spell, that can work in your favor. Like, oh, I'm at least, if I have to discard a card in this additional cost, I know that I'm discarding that card. Or if I know that I have to sacrifice a creature, I know that I'm sacrificing that creature. And those can be nice because sometimes you do just want to discard the card because it has madness or something, or because you have a graveyard strategy and you want that card to go in your graveyard. Or in the case of sacrificing a creature, you want that creature to be sacrificed because it makes tokens or something when it dies. And so you can get around some of the counterspell stuff that your opponent can do when you play those additional cost spells. This is not that case. This is you just spending more and more mana and your opponent going, okay, I'll just counter that. And even if they don't, you spent you spent 4 mana to gain 3 life. You spent 6 mana to gain 6 life. There's a threshold that this card will eventually cross where the life gain is on rate, but it's not for a while. It's not at any reasonable amount of mana that you might pay in a Pauper game where you don't have infinite mana available to you. And even if you did have infinite mana available to you, there's a whole lot of better things you can do than gaining infinite life. And if you want to gain infinite life, there's a lot faster, easier ways of doing that than using Taste of Paradise. Just a pretty bad card all around. I'm going to give this thing, let's go with a 1 point. I'm going to give it like a 1.2. There, if you do want to just gain life in green, there are plenty of creatures and other spells. Let's just look up an easy one. Weather the Storm gets played all the time. This is now 2 mana for instant speed, gain 3 life. And it has the Storm, so, if your opponent counters this, they didn't counter all the other Storm copies. This makes individual copies of the card, so you will gain those individual versions of life as well. Weather the Storm is just insanely better than Taste of Paradise if you didn't already know that, which I'm sure you did. But it is pretty stark to look at one card and go, oh, whoa, okay. we just made a way better one of those. No one should ever have to play Taste of Paradise. Except, I guess, that this can give you infinite life where Weather the Storm can't. It can just give you a ton of life for 2 mana instead of this, which could give you an infinite amount of life for an infinite amount of mana. Don't play that card. Grasp of Phantoms is 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Put target creature on top of its owner's library, and it has flashback for 7 and a blue. So this is one of them Time Ebb effects. Time Ebb is the original. There's probably another card that does this before Time Ebb. I don't know. Time Ebb's pretty early, from Portal. So maybe Time Ebb is the first one to do something like this. But Time Ebb, that's 3 mana for a sorcery. Put it on your opponent's top of your opponent's library. This is 4 mana for a sorcery, so you're already paying more to just get the same effect. We generally don't like that. But this now has flashback. So the idea is that you're paying a little extra because you know you can use it twice. That bit of card advantage is a reason that you might pay a little bit more up front. The flashback cost is ridiculously high, but there is some benefit to it knowing that if you milled it into your graveyard, you still have a chance of using it, just knowing that you're paying its flashback cost. But you have to pay more, so it's not as easy to throw in your graveyard. Sometimes flashback costs will be cheaper than the initial effect on the card, and sometimes, more often, they will be more expensive than the initial spell cost, because you can do some shenanigans where you're discarding cards or you're milling cards. And when you can do that, if it has a very cheap flashback cost, that's a very cheap and easy way of getting some of those spells. So they want to somewhat discourage that, even though it is a benefit to the card that it has this additional activation. I don't like it, though. This is too expensive for a Time Ebb effect. I think Time Ebbs generally feel like they're too expensive to begin with. And certainly 8 mana is way more than I would ever want to pay in any deck that I can think of in Pauper. So put them together, I think this is a pretty poor card. I would just play Time Ebb instead, and I also probably wouldn't play Time Ebb. But we'll give this thing a... I'm just going to give it a 2. I really wanted to give it a 1, but it does have some extra card advantage being able to be used twice. So I'll bump it up to a 2, though I still think it's pretty bad. Crossroads Consecrator is a single green mana for a 1/2 human cleric, and you can pay you can pay a single green and tap this creature to give target attacking human +1/+1 until end of turn. That seems unnecessarily narrow to me. You know, we saw that red creature at the beginning of that red human that has that battle cry for humans, and that's more understandable in that at least it's giving all your humans that ability. This is giving a single human +1/+1 until end of turn. Not even a counter. I think if you're going to go that narrow, you could at least bump this up to a counter. It's still a 1 mana 1/2. That's not a terrible rate to just get something on the board. You know, we see Novice Inspectors or Thraben Inspectors get played with that all the time. Although them being 1/2s, I don't think is the reason we play those on turn 1. It's those clue tokens that were the reason why those are such a good turn 1 play. And this guy doesn't have that. But he does give you a little boost. You got to pay for that boost, though. I just think this is so narrow, and it feels so expensive despite being a 1 mana creature with a single mana activation cost. This feels expensive to me. I don't particularly like that. You have to build your deck in a very specific way. How many green humans? I mean, there's still plenty of green humans. There's plenty of humans in every single color, in every single format, you know, Pauper or otherwise. But you're probably going to want to go more into something like Selesnya, because white has the biggest preponderance of humans, and also probably most of the best humans for these type of strategies are going to be in white. I really don't like this. I think I'm going to give this a 2.3, and a lot of that is just it's a 1 mana 1/2. And that's a better rate, but it's still I don't particularly like this. Let's keep on going to Call the Mountain Chocobo. 3 and a red for a sorcery. Search your library for a mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And then you create a 2/2 green bird creature token with, whenever a land you control enters, this token gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And this has flashback for 5 and a red. This is okay. I've seen this be okay. I saw this be okay in Limited for Final Fantasy. I really like that. You know, I'll admit I don't know a whole lot. I don't remember this from 7. I might not have even gotten that far in 7. 7's interesting to me. I like 7 a lot. Don't get me wrong. But I like that these flashback cards are depicting flashbacks that happen in the games. I think that's some really cool flavor that they've added into these. So check all your Final Fantasy cards if you didn't know that, and see which ones are flashing back to events in the game, or flashbacks that happen in the game get this flashback cost, and I think that's really cool. But how's the card itself? You're paying 4 mana for a 2/2 and a land. A specific land, and also it's not a basic mountain, it's any mountain. That can be kind of nice. Still, though, yeah. You do get a body on the table. It is a sorcery. It is 4 mana. That matters it mattered in the Final Fantasy set because there were lots of cards in red and blue that cared about paying 4 mana for your spells. Maybe it was just instants and sorceries that were over 4 mana, or maybe it was all spells over 4 mana. I think it was just instants and sorceries, because it was a lot of like Tela, Sage, and Mage stuff. So I think you'd imagine that would be, maybe it was just non-creature spells. Who knows? But this is okay. 4 mana gets you a creature, gets you a land. You can play that land. The creature gets bigger. It has that kind of landfall ability on it. You can flash it back later. This is not the best rate, but you are getting pretty decent card advantage. This puts a card back into your hand, so it kind of cantrips, even though it's turning a spell into a land. Still, that's okay. It's all right. It's all right. Plus, you're flashing it back, so it gives you even more card advantage. You're kind of getting four cards for the price of one card here. 2 tokens, 2 cards. And the tokens are creatures that, are fine creatures that I think you'd be okay playing if they were broken apart from this and just on their own. So I do kind of like the card advantage something like this gives you. I haven't really seen it see play in Pauper, but I think it totally could, especially if you were getting into more of a deck that cared about mana cost for stuff. If you even got into some of those, this doesn't get played in Red Storm for sure, but if you are playing some of those similar Red Storm cards that reduce the cost of your red spells, now you're getting some really good value off of something like this. I really don't mind it. I'm gonna give this thing I think I'm gonna give this a 4. Yeah, I think I'm gonna give it a 4. I think it's that good. That versatile, at least. Vassal Soul is 1 and 2 Azorius hybrid mana, so white or blue, and a white or blue. You get a 2/2 flying spirit creature for that. That's just not good. It's just a little French vanilla creature here. 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. Suppose the hybrid mana is supposed to make me go, ooh, well, at least it's versatile enough to, you can pay it with lots of different colors. But, this is just a little too normal and a little too bad. I'm going to give this thing I'll just give this a 2, I guess. Probably doesn't deserve that 2. And last official card of the day is Provoke. 1 and a green for an instant. Untap target creature you don't control. That creature blocks this turn if able, and you draw a card. Originally from Stronghold, where it basically says the same thing. Does it say the exact same thing? It does. It does. So haven't really had to change this for templating reasons. It's okay. The best thing about this is it draws you the card, so it cantrips in that way, and that's fine. I suppose there are ways of getting rid of some of your opponent's creatures with this. These days, you really just play more bite and fight effects than you would a provoke effect like this. But a lot of those bite and fight effects wouldn't draw you the card. It does require you to basically be in combat. Not basically, you have to be in combat. You have to not only be in combat, you have to be attacking. Because you need to force their creature to block. I guess you can play it before combat and it just says that creature has to block, but I really don't know what to think about Provoke. I think it is probably just a little bit too narrow for our purposes on being a good card. We have enough good bite effects specifically, a ram through or something like that, or even like a monstrous emergence that we end up playing those a little bit more. Monstrous emergence is a sorcery though, so that's something to consider. I think this is fine, but I don't think it's good. And I think for that reason, I'm going to give it a 3.1. Yeah, I'm going to give it a 3.1. Let's do a bonus card and then call it a day. We'll end with Inspired Inventor. 2 and a white for a 2/2 human artificer. And when this creature enters, you choose one. Either you get 3 energy counters, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. I remember seeing this card and thinking, this might be good for those Orzhov bounce decks, right? This is a creature, generally the energy doesn't matter. You can find decks where having the energy would matter, but a counter on a creature isn't bad because it could be on this creature, and then you just have a 3-mana 3/3, which is not amazing, but it's at least something. Or you can give that counter to a creature that probably wants it a lot more. And then creating the servo artifact creature token is nice too, because it is an artifact, and that can potentially up your artifact count when you're playing refurbished familiars and things like that. That's okay too. The problem comes in when you're thinking about the cards that you want to bounce back to your hand with the Orzhov Blade decks. And this thing itself is not an artifact, so Glinthawk doesn't bounce it back to your hand. So you really are going to just be playing core Skyfisher with this. Maybe Ephemerate. Maybe. Is this the card you really want to be ephemerating? I'm not sure. We have other creatures. In fact, I think we looked at it somewhat recently. Was it Dawnbringer Cleric? I think. Dawnbringer. Yeah, Dawnbringer Cleric, which I don't want the alchemy one. What are you doing? No? What? This one. Okay, there you go. This one can gain you 2 life, destroy an enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. Different skill set for sure, but this is 2 mana, which is a lot easier to bounce and play again on the same turn, and you can get multiple of these kinds of effects. And I think that's generally better than this, even though being able to put down extra creatures. We've also gotten some other cards in like TMNT. There are some cards now that you're able to play that will make you extra artifact creatures that you can bounce back to your hand. And I believe those are cheaper than the Inspired Inventor. You kind of have to think of this as a charm, though. You are getting 3 different effects that you can use whenever you need to. And I think there are some decks that could potentially take advantage of any of these 3. And so I don't want to give it a bad score. I think I'm going to give this thing a 3.5. Because it is versatile. It probably can work in a number of different types of decks that are doing lots of different kinds of things. And I think it could be an interesting and useful role player in those decks. But generally, I think you can find cards that are going to have a little bit more impact in specific ways that this card just won't be able to live up to. All right, that's all for today. We'll catch you on the next one. See ya.